In the winter of 1823, 15 young men studying at Whitmore Seminary in Pennsylvania died within 6 weeks. Their deaths followed a chilling pattern: violent convulsions, speaking in tongues, and blackened fingernails. The local doctor, baffled by the symptoms, refused to sign their death certificates, claiming no known disease fit the description. What he discovered in their blood caused him to flee the county, burning his medical notes. Church officials sealed the seminary and buried the bodies in unmarked graves. For 2 centuries, the Presbyterian Church avoided discussing the events, but recently uncovered letters from a surviving student reveal a disturbing truth. Before we explore what happened, I want to make something clear. This channel is for those brave enough to face America's darkest secrets. If you've come this far, you're not like most people. Hit subscribe and join the select few who seek the truth. Now let's return to that cursed winter in Pennsylvania. Help me with a like and a subscribe to motivate me to make better videos, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. The seminary, founded in 1819 in western Pennsylvania, was built on 200 acres of woodland. It aimed to train ministers for the frontier, offering rigorous theological education. Students came from small towns and farming families eager to serve God. The seminary was strict, with a curriculum covering Greek, Latin, and theology alongside daily chapel attendance and moral conduct expectations. The seminary's head, Dr. Cornelius Ashford, demanded excellence and lived on campus with his wife Margaret and their daughter Sarah. By autumn 1823, 43 students were enrolled, ranging from the 28-year-old Marcus Hartwell to the 18-year-old Timothy Brennan. The seminary's routine was intense, with early mornings, academic lectures, and communal prayer. The students were all committed to their studies, unaware that their world was about to be shattered. The first sign of trouble came on December 3rd, 1823. On December 3rd, 1823, Thomas Milliken, a 22-year-old student, failed to show up for morning chapel, which was highly unusual. His roommate David Crane found him writhing on his bed, convulsing violently while speaking unintelligibly. What shocked David most, however, was Thomas's blackened fingernails. He called for help, and soon several classmates gathered, horrified by the sight of their friend in distress. Dr. Ashford arrived quickly and was visibly shaken when he saw Thomas's eyes rolled back and heard him utter twisted Latin phrases like Dominus viscum infernum and Corpus diaboli anima peritita. Dr. Ashford summoned Dr. Whitley, the local physician, who arrived to examine Thomas. Despite his years of experience, Dr. Whitley was horrified by the symptoms. Thomas's pulse was erratic, his skin pale with dark veins, and his hands completely black. Despite trying various treatments, nothing helped. As word of Thomas's condition spread, some students speculated about divine judgment or demonic possession. After 21 hours of suffering, Thomas died on December 4th. Speaking his last words, the book in the chapel, God forgive us all. His body showed signs of relief, and his skin returned to its normal color. His funeral was held 2 days later, with his classmates deeply mourning the loss. However, strange occurrences continued to haunt the seminary. Students complained of nightmares, strange noises, and feelings of unease. Dr. Ashford tried to maintain normalcy, but the shadow of Thomas's death loomed over the community. On December 9th, just 3 days after Thomas's funeral, James Morrison, a close friend of Thomas, began showing the same symptoms. His convulsions started at the same time as Thomas's, exactly 300 a.m. The symptoms mirrored Thomas's exactly, with the same blackened nails and twisted Latin phrases. Dr. Whitley, who had been researching the illness, found no medical explanation for the recurring pattern. James died 21 hours later, repeating the same final words, the book in the chapel. God forgive us all. The pattern of identical deaths set the seminary on edge, and whispers of curses and divine retribution began to spread. The precise timing and repetition of the same final words from each victim sent a cold shiver through the seminary community. Dr. Whitley began to suspect an unknown contagion, though he had never encountered a disease with such consistent symptoms. Fearing further spread, he ordered James's body to be buried immediately and his personal belongings burned as a precaution. He implemented a quarantine isolating anyone who had been in close contact with the victims and sealing the dormitory for fumigation. Fear gripped the students, who now saw the seminary not as a place of learning, but as a trap where death could strike at any moment. In response, Dr. Ashford intensified chapel services and urged students to seek comfort through prayer and study. He also informed church authorities in Philadelphia requesting guidance. Meanwhile, the Presbyterian Church dispatched Reverend Dr. Jonathan Blackwood, a seasoned crisis manager, to investigate. Before Dr. Blackwood could arrive, the pattern repeated on December 12th, claiming Samuel Brewster, a popular student from Lancaster. Samuel's death followed the same terrifying pattern: convulsions, blackened nails, and death exactly 21 hours later. His final words echoed those of the others, the book in the chapel. God forgive us all. Dr. Whitley documented everything, but the consistent pattern only deepened the mystery. By the time Dr. Blackwood arrived on December 15th, he took charge of the situation, concluding that an unidentified disease might be responsible. He quarantined the seminary, restricting all movement in and out of the grounds. Despite the measures, the sense of normalcy evaporated. The seminary, once a place of spiritual and academic devotion, had become a prison of fear. Dr. Blackwood's first action was to establish a schedule of prayer services, hoping divine intervention could stop the deaths. However, the situation only worsened. On December 18th, Peter Cunningham, a pious student known for his devotion, fell victim to the same fate. His death mirrored the previous ones: violent convulsions, blackened fingernails, and a final cryptic message. The book in the chapel, God forgive us all. The repeated phrase became a key focus for Dr. Whitley and Dr. Blackwood. It was clear that something sinister connected these deaths, and the book in the chapel was the only clue they had. Despite Dr. Ashford's reluctance to disturb the sacred chapel, Dr. Blackwood believed it was necessary to investigate the book, suspecting it might hold the key to understanding the mysterious deaths. By December 20th, panic had fully set in. Students refused meals, fearing contamination. They huddled together, praying fervently, and some showed signs of nervous breakdowns. The seminary's once orderly life had descended into chaos, and faculty struggled to maintain any semblance of control. The mystery of the deaths was only deepening, and everyone knew the next victim could be anyone. As the deaths at Whitmore Seminary continued, fear spread among the students. Many began writing desperate letters to their families, begging to leave despite the quarantine. Timothy Brennan, the youngest, expressed his terror of never seeing his mother again. Marcus Hartwell, the eldest and most mature student, tried to comfort the others, but was also struggling under the constant threat of death. It was on the night of December 20th that David Crane, who had witnessed Thomas Milliken's death, approached Dr. Whitley with a confession that would alter everything. David, visibly shaken, knocked on Dr. Whitley's door and asked for a private conversation. Inside, David revealed a secret he had been hiding. He and several other students had been part of a secret study group that met in the chapel after evening prayers. They had been studying a mysterious book which Thomas had discovered in a hidden compartment behind the altar. This book, which none of them had seen before, seemed to contain knowledge beyond anything they had learned in their regular studies. The revelation stunned Dr. Whitley. It was the first tangible connection between the victims beyond the timing and symptoms of their deaths. If all the deceased had been involved in the secret study group, their deaths might not have been random. They could be linked to the book that each victim had referenced in their final words. David trembled as he described the book. It was bound in what appeared to be human skin, with pages made from an ancient parchment. The text was a mix of Latin and strange symbols none of them could fully identify. Thomas had discovered the book during routine maintenance in the chapel in early October when he noticed a loose stone behind the altar. Inside, he found the book and other old items. Fascinated, Thomas shared his discovery with his closest friends, James Morrison, Samuel Brewster, Peter Cunningham, David Crane, and Marcus Hartwell. The six of them formed a secret study group to decipher the book, meeting twice weekly after evening prayers. The book seemed to be an advanced theological text, but it was written in a style that predated anything they had studied in their curriculum. It contained spiritual practices beyond Orthodox Presbyterian doctrine, with Latin text interspersed with Hebrew words and unrecognizable symbols. Thomas believed it contained hidden wisdom that could deepen their understanding of God, convinced it was part of a divine plan. While the group was initially skeptical, Thomas's enthusiasm eventually won them over. As the group delved deeper, they began to feel spiritually superior to their peers, believing they were chosen for special knowledge. Their secret meetings had not gone unnoticed, with some students reporting strange lights and sounds from the chapel at night. But Dr. Ashford had found nothing during his inspections. The group had been careful to hide their activities, meeting only when they were sure the faculty was asleep. David continued his confession, describing how the book contained not just text, but instructions for spiritual exercises, meditation techniques, dietary restrictions, and rituals involving candles, incense, and geometric patterns. The group began practicing these, and they claimed to experience vivid dreams where they communicated with angelic beings, learning profound truths about God and creation. Their academic performance improved, and they felt more spiritually alive. However, as they continued, the benefits came at a price. They started to experience physical symptoms, headaches, insomnia, and strange sensations in their hands and feet. They developed unusual cravings, particularly for undercooked meat. Thomas, the group's leader, suffered the worst. He complained of a constant burning sensation in his stomach and reported hearing voices in unknown languages. Instead of seeking help, Thomas convinced the others that these symptoms were signs of spiritual advancement. The group's relationships with other students and faculty began to change. They became impatient with traditional theology and looked down on their peers. They believed they were part of an elite group chosen for a higher purpose. But Marcus Hartwell, the eldest, began to have doubts. In November, he told David that he had begun having nightmares, where the angelic beings turned into hideous figures, and the wisdom they had received became blasphemous. Marcus wanted to end the meetings, but Thomas convinced him that his doubts were a test of faith. David's confession revealed that the deaths were not random. They were the result of their dangerous exploration of forbidden knowledge. The students had unknowingly opened a door to something far darker than they could have ever imagined. As Dr. Whitley listened to David's confession, the pieces of the mystery began to fall into place. Thomas had argued that their spiritual progress required testing, convincing the group to continue their studies even as they experienced disturbing symptoms. He had become increasingly obsessed with the book, spending hours copying its passages and creating his own interpretations of the symbols and diagrams. He spoke of their group as the chosen ones, believing they were being prepared for a divine mission that would transform the Presbyterian Church. David's revelation tied the group's secret study sessions to the deaths in a way Dr. Whitley hadn't anticipated. The physical symptoms had started in late November, beginning with Thomas and gradually affecting the others. Alongside the physical effects, there were psychological changes: aggression, paranoia, and an elevated sense of superiority. The book also contained warnings about the consequences of improper study. It suggested that anyone who began the spiritual journey outlined within its pages but failed to complete it would face divine judgment and destruction. David's revelation took an even darker turn when he shared the fate of the book itself. The day before Thomas's death, the book had disappeared from its hiding place. The group had searched the chapel, but it was gone without a trace. Thomas was convinced someone had discovered their secret and stolen it to stop them from completing their spiritual journey. his paranoia grew, accusing classmates and faculty members of spying on them. After the book's disappearance, the group's symptoms worsened. Headaches intensified, insomnia became unbearable, and nightmares about dark figures chasing them began to haunt them. Dr. Whitley was shaken by the implications of David's confession. If these deaths were linked not to a disease, but to some psychological or spiritual process set in motion by their secret studies, it was far beyond his medical expertise. The deaths might not have been natural at all, but connected to the dangerous spiritual practices triggered by the book. He knew he had to immediately share this information with Dr. Blackwood, hoping the church officials' experience with theological crises could provide insight into what was happening. When Dr. Blackwood arrived, he launched a full investigation. His findings were more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Nearly half the student body had known about the secret study group but had been too scared to speak out. Students came forward with accounts of seeing strange lights and hearing unfamiliar chanting coming from the chapel. Others confessed that Thomas had tried to recruit them into the group, but they had declined due to the secretive nature of their activities. Professor Hartley and Professor Sterling reported similar observations. Students like Thomas James Samuel and Peter had once excelled academically, but their behavior had changed. They had become more argumentative and began challenging orthodox theological positions in ways that seemed designed to provoke rather than engage in legitimate scholarly debate. Several students admitted the group had become dismissive of traditional Presbyterian teachings and expressed ideas outside the approved curriculum, citing their personal theological insights gained through prayer and meditation. The investigation revealed the extent of the group's deviation from the seminary's values. For nearly 3 months, the students had been meeting in secret, studying the book, and practicing rituals that fell outside Orthodox Presbyterian beliefs. Their attitudes had shifted with a growing sense of spiritual pride and exclusivity. They believed they were part of an elite group with access to hidden knowledge and were destined for extraordinary ministries, creating division among the student body. Dr. Blackwood recognized these signs as classic indicators of spiritual corruption and heretical thinking. The deaths had begun only after the book disappeared, suggesting that while the book might not have caused the deaths directly, the spiritual and psychological effects triggered by the group's practices could be the root cause. Dr. Blackwood ordered a search of the chapel despite Dr. Ashford's resistance. The search uncovered disturbing evidence of the group's activities. Behind the altar, geometric patterns were carved into the floor, unlike anything seen in Orthodox Christian art. The area had been covered during services to conceal these markings, suggesting they were part of a ritual. Most telling were the papers found in a hidden compartment. These contained handwritten notes and passages from the book transcribed by Thomas Millikan. It was clear that the students had been deeply involved in occult practices guided by the mysterious book. Dr. Blackwood, now certain that the deaths were tied to the group's secret studies and the forbidden knowledge they had pursued, realized the seminary was dealing with something far darker than a simple outbreak of disease. The true horror of what had been unleashed now became terrifyingly clear. The notes found in the chapel revealed the extent to which the group had strayed from Orthodox Christianity with spiritual practices that involved direct communication with supernatural entities, altered states of consciousness, and methods for gaining power through spiritual manipulation. The language used in the book was a disturbing mix of Christian terminology and occult traditions, creating a sinister fusion that was entirely foreign to Presbyterian theology. One particularly alarming passage described a ritual for opening the gates between worlds. The ritual required 6 participants to serve as vessels for divine manifestation, granting them enhanced spiritual powers and direct access to forbidden knowledge. However, the ritual warned of dire consequences for those who proved unworthy or who attempted to abandon the process once it had begun. Dr. Whitley realized that the group had unknowingly been performing some version of this ritual through their regular meetings and study sessions. The group's focus on the book and its teachings had initiated a process now claiming the lives of its members one by one. On December 21st, Marcus Hartwell, the eldest member, and the one who had voiced doubts about their practices, died. His final words were different from the others. He repeatedly spoke of being chosen and marked for the harvest. These words suggested that Marcus might have had a deeper understanding of what was happening to them, but he died before he could explain further. David Crane, now the last surviving member of the original group, was consumed with guilt and terror, convinced he would soon follow his friends. His psychological pressure was immense. Isolated by his knowledge of the secret group and the role he played in its activities, David was also the only one who could offer answers to end the deaths. Dr. Whitley and Dr. Blackwood questioned him relentlessly, hoping for a breakthrough. David revealed that the book contained prophecies about the group's fate. It stated that the 6 members would serve as bridges between worlds, facilitating the manifestation of supernatural entities in the physical realm. The process would require their physical lives as a sacrifice, but their souls would ascend to a higher plane of existence, acting as intermediaries between the divine and mortal worlds. The prophecies suggested that once the process began, it could not be stopped. The group members were spiritually bound, their lives sacrificed in intervals, fueling the manifestation of otherworldly forces. Dr. Whitley had considered the possibility of mass hysteria or a shared delusion, but the precision of the deaths and the consistency of the symptoms made this theory seem insufficient. Dr. Blackwood, with his experience in theological crises, believed that the group had opened themselves to demonic forces. Their involvement with the book had led them into dangerous spiritual territory, and now they were paying the price for their arrogance and deviation from orthodox faith. On December 22nd, David, overwhelmed by guilt and the creeping symptoms that mirrored those of his friends, made a desperate decision. He was convinced he would be the next to die, but he had to understand what had happened and perhaps find a way to break the deadly pattern. David's search led him to the seminary's basement, an area forgotten since the building's construction. There, behind a bricked-up wall, he uncovered a hidden chamber filled with books, documents, and artifacts that predated the seminary's construction. Among the materials was a shocking discovery: the true identity of Reverend Josiah Whitmore, the man the seminary was named after. The documents revealed a different story than the one the seminary's founders had believed. Reverend Whitmore was not the heroic Revolutionary War minister they had honored, but a man with dark ties and intentions that aligned more closely with the very occult practices the students had unwittingly pursued. This discovery revealed that the seminary from its inception had been linked to a much darker and more sinister history than anyone had ever imagined, and the book was just the beginning of a much larger and more terrifying legacy. The horrors of the seminary were now fully unveiled. What began as a tale of mysterious deaths had transformed into something far more chilling. As David realized the truth about the seminary's foundation and its dark past, the line between good and evil blurred, and he was left to wonder if there was any way to stop the forces that had already claimed so many lives. The documents David uncovered painted a horrifying picture of the true Josiah Whitmore. While officially celebrated as a heroic Revolutionary War minister, Whitmore's true legacy was far darker. In 1768, Whitmore was ordained as a Presbyterian minister and served a congregation in eastern Pennsylvania. However, over time he became deeply involved in occult practices, including folk magic, astrology, and ceremonial rituals, all of which he justified as advanced spiritual knowledge. His congregation, initially impressed by his apparent gifts, soon began to suspect that his practices were veering dangerously away from Presbyterian doctrine. By 1781, Whitmore's activities had spiraled out of control. He attempted a ritual to permanently open communication between the physical and spiritual worlds. This ritual required 6 volunteers to serve as vessels for divine manifestation. The ritual went horribly wrong, and the 6 participants died within hours. Their bodies, found the next morning in a horrifying state, bore eerie similarities to the symptoms that had plagued the students at Whitmore Seminary: blackened extremities and blasphemous utterances. The scandal led to Whitmore's arrest, where he claimed that the deaths were divine judgment on those unworthy of the spiritual revelations he offered. In 1782, Whitmore was convicted of witchcraft and murder. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence ritual implements occult books and strange markings convinced the jury of his guilt. After his execution, his personal library and ritual items were confiscated. Instead of being destroyed, however, they were hidden away to prevent further harm, though they would remain buried for decades. David's discovery revealed that the very land where Whitmore Seminary was built was the site of these tragic events. The location where Whitmore conducted his occult practices and where the 6 congregants had died. The seminary's founders, unaware of this history, believed they were honoring a Revolutionary War hero, not a convicted witch. The most chilling revelation came when David learned that the mysterious book the students had been studying was actually Whitmore's personal grimoire, a collection of occult knowledge and rituals. This book had been hidden in the chapel to ensure that Whitmore's work would continue even after his death. The grimoire described in detail the ritual that Whitmore had attempted, explaining that the 6 participants' lives were necessary to open the gates between worlds. The deaths weren't a failure of the ritual, but its intended outcome, providing the spiritual energy needed to manifest supernatural entities in the physical realm. The students unknowingly had been repeating Whitmore's failed experiment. Their study sessions had prepared them to serve as the 6 vessels for the ritual, and their deaths were not random but necessary sacrifices to complete a process that had been set in motion over 40 years ago. Even more horrifying was the information David found about how the ritual could be interrupted. According to the grimoire, stopping the ritual would require destroying the book and performing a counter-ritual to sever the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. However, the grimoire warned that any attempt to break the ritual would result in the immediate death of the remaining vessels, as the supernatural entities would claim their lives to prevent the interruption. Now David faced an impossible decision. He could try to destroy the grimoire and break the ritual, but doing so would almost certainly cost him his own life. Alternatively, he could allow the process to continue, hoping that his death would complete the ritual and stop the entities from claiming more lives, though the grimoire hinted at far-reaching consequences if the ritual succeeded. On the night of December 22nd, David struggled with this decision. The physical symptoms that had plagued his friends were now affecting him more severely. The burning sensation in his stomach intensified, and he began hearing the same disturbing voices Thomas had described. By the dawn of December 23rd, David had made up his mind. He sought out Dr. Whitley and Dr. Blackwood to reveal everything he had uncovered about the seminary's dark origins and the true nature of the book that had led to the deaths of his friends. The horror that had begun as a series of mysterious deaths now revealed itself as part of a much older, darker history. David's revelation sent shockwaves through the seminary as the faculty and students realized that they were caught in a ritual that had been set into motion long before their time, one that could potentially unleash unimaginable forces on the world. The decision David faced was not only about his life, but the fate of the entire seminary, and perhaps even the world itself. The 4 men sat together in stunned silence as David recounted the terrifying history of Josiah Whitmore and the dark ritual that had claimed the lives of his friends. Dr. Whitley, a man of science, found himself struggling to accept the supernatural elements of David's account. His medical training had never prepared him for anything beyond the physical, but the undeniable precision of the deaths, the consistency of the symptoms, and the historical evidence that David had uncovered made it impossible to ignore. Dr. Blackwood, however, was more prepared to accept that supernatural forces were at work. His experience with theological controversies and occult practices in Christian communities had shown him that such forces could have devastating consequences. He had encountered other cases of spiritual deception, but never one so systematic or deadly. After hearing David's chilling revelation, Dr. Blackwood agreed that action had to be taken. There was no other way to save the seminary or themselves from the malevolent forces that had been unleashed. Despite Dr. Ashford's reluctance to believe in anything outside of traditional theological explanation, he was ultimately convinced by the mounting evidence. It was clear that the seminary was facing something far beyond a medical epidemic. The decision was made to attempt the counter-ritual on the night of December 23rd, guided by the instructions from Whitmore's grimoire, but adapted to Orthodox Christian principles. Dr. Blackwood would lead the ritual using his knowledge of Presbyterian liturgy and spiritual warfare. Dr. Whitley and Dr. Ashford would assist, while David, the last remaining vessel, would serve as the focal point for breaking the ritual's spiritual bonds. The men gathered in the chapel as midnight approached, bringing with them the grimoire and all the necessary materials for the counter-ritual. The atmosphere in the chapel felt profoundly different. It was colder, more oppressive, and the air was thick with an unseen presence. The chapel, which once felt like a place of solace, now seemed to pulse with malevolence, every corner heavy with the weight of the supernatural. Candles flickered despite the absence of any breeze, and a sense of spiritual oppression gripped them as they began to prepare for the ritual. Dr. Blackwood's voice rang out as he recited passages from Scripture, invoking divine protection and seeking God's help to break the evil forces that had taken root in the seminary. His words were steady and commanding, but even he couldn't fully mask the strain of confronting such dark forces. As the ritual progressed, David began to feel the familiar symptoms that had overtaken his friends: shaking hands, darkening nails, and an overwhelming sense of dread. But instead of succumbing to the violent convulsions that had claimed his friends, David remained conscious, his mind still anchored to the ritual. The moment of truth arrived when Dr. Blackwood and the others began to burn the grimoire page by page, while reciting prayers for spiritual cleansing. As the flames consumed each page, the atmosphere grew even more charged. The temperature dropped dramatically and shadows flickered across the walls despite the steady light from the candles. An eerie grinding noise echoed from beneath the chapel floor, a sound as if something was desperately trying to break through from the other side. David began to speak, his voice not entirely his own. He described visions of his dead friends trapped between worlds, their souls unable to find peace. He could also see the dark, malevolent entities that had been feeding on their life forces, their anger swelling at the attempt to break the ritual. The entities tried to seize control of David's body, using him as a conduit to fully manifest in the physical realm. David felt the full weight of their fury, but the counter-ritual held them back. The struggle between the forces of darkness and the ritual's power was intense, tearing at David's body and soul. As the last page of the grimoire was consumed in flames, David let out a scream so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations of the chapel. For a terrifying moment, the others feared they had lost him, as the black discoloration spread up his arms and his body convulsed violently. His voice became guttural and inhuman as the entities made one final attempt to claim him. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, the temperature returned to normal, and the supernatural sounds ceased. David collapsed to the floor unconscious, but breathing, the blackness fading from his skin as his body began to heal. The counter-ritual had succeeded, but at a terrible cost. David survived the night, but he was forever changed by what he had endured. His experience had marked him in ways no one could fully understand. He emerged from the chapel a different man, having faced the abyss and barely escaped with his soul intact. Though he went on to serve as a minister, David never spoke publicly about the horrors he had witnessed at Whitmore Seminary. He never married, nor did he have children, as if fearful of passing on some dark spiritual contamination to future generations. The deaths at the seminary ceased with the destruction of the grimoire and the completion of the counter-ritual. However, the institution itself could never recover from the tragedy. The Presbyterian Church, now aware of the dark origins of the land and the true nature of Josiah Whitmore, made the decision to close the seminary permanently. The official reason given was the need to relocate to a more accessible location, but those who had investigated the events understood the real motivation. The seminary could never continue under the shadow of its grim past. Dr. Ashford resigned from his position as head of the seminary and accepted a pastorate in a small rural town. He spent the remainder of his career serving a quiet congregation, though his family noticed he became much more conservative in his theology, deeply wary of any claims to special spiritual revelations. Professor Hartley and Professor Sterling both found positions at other institutions, but their experiences at Whitmore had left them deeply cautious. They became strong advocates for stricter oversight of student activities and more careful screening of students for signs of spiritual pride or dangerous beliefs. The tragedy at Whitmore Seminary would be quietly remembered, its true story hidden from the public for years. But for those who had lived through it, the memory of those 15 young lives lost and the terrifying forces they had unleashed would never fade. The aftermath of the Whitmore Seminary tragedy left deep scars on those who had lived through it. The surviving students were relocated to other Presbyterian seminaries to complete their education, though many struggled to cope with the psychological trauma they had experienced. Some left the ministry entirely unable to reconcile their faith with the horrors they had witnessed, while others became staunchly orthodox, retreating into a rigid theology as a means of protecting themselves from any hint of spiritual danger. Dr. Whitley, whose rational medical worldview had once governed his life, found himself shattered by the events he had witnessed. His scientific understanding of the world was no longer sufficient to explain the supernatural forces that had torn apart the lives of his colleagues and students. Unable to escape the memories of the supernatural horrors and the grotesque symptoms that had overtaken his patients, Dr. Whitley relocated to a different county. He sank into a life of heavy drinking, seeking refuge from the nightmares and the relentless guilt that plagued him. His health deteriorated over the years, and he died in 1835 from liver disease, his family reporting that he had suffered from terrible nightmares for the rest of his life, waking up screaming about blackened fingernails and blasphemous Latin phrases. Dr. Blackwood returned to his administrative duties in Philadelphia, though the events at Whitmore Seminary had left an indelible mark on him. He became one of the Presbyterian Church's foremost experts on identifying and combating occult influences within Christian communities. While his expertise in spiritual warfare and identifying dangerous practices was sought after, he was careful never to discuss the specific events at Whitmore Seminary. The experience had profoundly affected his understanding of both spiritual warfare and the existence of supernatural evil. The physical remnants of the seminary, the buildings were abandoned and eventually sold to a private buyer who had no knowledge of the dark history they carried. The main building was converted into a private residence, while the other structures were demolished or repurposed for agricultural use. The chapel, once the site of the grimoire's destruction, was turned into a living room. Visitors often commented on the room's unsettling atmosphere, describing it as cold and oppressive even on warm days. It seemed as though the malevolent presence that had once inhabited the chapel remained lingering in the very walls. The cemetery where the 15 victims were buried was eventually moved to make way for agricultural improvements. The bodies were reinterred in a public cemetery in Millbrook, marked with simple stones bearing only their names and dates of death. No mention of their connection to the seminary or the tragic events that had claimed their lives. Over time, even these modest memorials were forgotten, and the location of the graves became lost to history. Dr. Whitley's medical notes, along with the church's investigation reports, and Dr. Blackwood's recommendations were sealed by church authorities and stored in the Presbyterian Historical Society's archives. The official cause of death for all 15 victims was listed as consumption complicated by nervous exhaustion. This diagnosis, which satisfied the public's curiosity, concealed the true nature of the tragedy, ensuring that the scandal remained buried. It wasn't until 2019 when David Crane's great-great-grandson discovered old letters in an attic trunk that the truth about Whitmore Seminary began to surface. These letters, along with Dr. Whitley's notes and fragments of the church investigation, became the only surviving accounts of what truly happened during the winter of 1823 to 1824. In his letters, David Crane described the profound impact the experience had on his understanding of good and evil, faith and doubt, and the dangers of spiritual pride. He wrote of the seductive nature of the forbidden knowledge the study group had pursued, and how over time their quest for spiritual advancement had led them away from the safety of Orthodox Christian faith. David expressed deep remorse for his role in the tragedy, and he spent the rest of his life trying to atone for his participation in the activities that had cost his friends their lives. His letters also revealed that he continued to struggle with guilt and trauma in the years after the incident. He was haunted by vivid nightmares, in which he relived the deaths of his friends, and was tormented by the thought that he might somehow be responsible for their fate. Despite seeking counseling from several ministers, David was never able to find peace with what had happened at the seminary. David's ministry was characterized by an unwavering commitment to orthodoxy. He served rural Pennsylvania congregations, focusing on practical pastoral care and biblical preaching rather than theological speculation. His sermons emphasized humility, the dangers of spiritual pride, and the importance of staying within the bounds of Orthodox Christian teaching. The tragedy at Whitmore Seminary stands as a chilling reminder of the dangers that arise when spiritual pride and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge lead people away from the safety of Orthodox faith and community accountability. The 15 young men who died had been sincere in their desire to serve God, but their ambition to become extraordinary ministers led them to seek shortcuts to spiritual power, which ultimately destroyed them. The story also serves as a cautionary tale about the lasting effects of past evils. Josiah Whitmore's occult practices had created spiritual openings that remained active long after his death. The seminary's founders, unaware of the dark history of the land built on cursed ground, and their ignorance did not shield them from the consequences of their ignorance. The Presbyterian Church's response to the tragedy reflected a strong commitment to protecting its members from spiritual dangers while maintaining confidentiality to prevent panic and scandal. The decision to classify the investigation reports and relocate the surviving students illustrated both pastoral concern and institutional wisdom. It allowed the church to manage the fallout from an event that had nearly destroyed one of its most promising educational institutions. In the years that followed, the church implemented stricter oversight of seminary activities, focusing on preventing the kind of secretive, spiritually dangerous practices that had taken root at Whitmore. The curricula of Presbyterian seminaries were revised to include explicit warnings about the dangers of spiritual pride, the pursuit of esoteric knowledge, and the importance of adhering to Orthodox Christian teaching. Professors were trained to identify signs of heretical thinking and to intervene before students could be led astray by claims of special revelation or advanced spiritual techniques. Despite various theories proposed by modern scholars ranging from mass hysteria to poisoning or deliberate sabotage, what truly happened at Whitmore Seminary remains an open question. The events of 1823 to 1824 continue to haunt those who study the available documents, serving as a grim reminder of the potential cost of unchecked spiritual ambition and the powerful forces that can be unleashed when the bounds of faith are disregarded. The chilling story of Whitmore Seminary, buried beneath centuries of time and secrecy, continues to resonate both as a historical enigma and a spiritual cautionary tale. The survivors, forever changed by the horrors they witnessed, struggled to rebuild their lives. Some abandoned the ministry altogether, unable to reconcile their faith with the supernatural forces they encountered. Others, seeking protection, adhered to an even more orthodox form of theology, perhaps as a shield from the very dangers they had unknowingly invited. Dr. Whitley's career never recovered. The rational scientific approach that had once governed his life shattered after witnessing events beyond his comprehension. His descent into alcoholism and eventual death in 1835 reflects a man struggling to process a reality that defied medical explanation. He was haunted by the same visions that plagued him during his time at Whitmore Seminary, unable to escape the traumatic memories of blackened fingernails and blasphemous Latin utterances. Dr. Blackwood, though he continued his work in Philadelphia, was forever affected by his experience. His expertise in spiritual warfare grew, but he carefully kept silent about the events at the seminary. The lessons learned at Whitmore were too dark to be publicly shared, and so he focused on preventing the spread of occult influences in Christian communities without revealing the source of his deep understanding. The once foreboding seminary grounds were sold to a private family in the 1850s who transformed the land into a farm. The land, now peaceful and productive, seemed to have been cleansed of its dark history. The chapel where the ritual had been performed was converted into a family room, and visitors occasionally remarked on an eerie atmosphere in the space. The cemetery where the 15 victims had been buried was erased by agricultural activity, and their graves were lost to time, relocated to a public cemetery where even their names were gradually forgotten. The Presbyterian Church's official history of the period glossed over the seminary's demise, offering a sanitized version of events. The public was told that the seminary closed in 1824 due to transportation difficulties, a narrative that concealed the much darker truth. The church chose to suppress information about the incident, likely out of pastoral concern for its members. The investigation reports and Dr. Blackwood's recommendations were sealed and classified for nearly 2 centuries, leaving only fragments of truth to be uncovered in later years. In 2019, the discovery of David Crane's letters revealed the emotional and spiritual toll the events had taken on him. These letters, alongside Dr. Whitley's notes and fragments of the church's investigation, have shed light on the real story of the seminary's tragic past. David's letters revealed his deep remorse for his role in the tragedy and his lifelong struggle with guilt and trauma. He remained committed to a life of Christian service, but could never fully escape the scars left by his experiences. His ministry focused on humility, spiritual caution, and an unwavering adherence to orthodox Christian teachings. David Crane's survival and his eventual choice to dedicate his life to ministry demonstrates that it is possible to encounter supernatural evil and emerge spiritually intact, but only by clinging to divine protection and the safety of established faith. His willingness to sacrifice his life to stop the malevolent forces is a reflection of the highest ideals of Christian service. Yet his lifelong trauma also speaks to the profound, lasting impact such experiences can have. The suppression of the Whitmore Seminary incident and the fading of collective memory over time reflect broader shifts in American culture. As the country moved from a belief in spiritual warfare and the supernatural to an era dominated by scientific materialism, incidents like this one were reinterpreted or forgotten. The story of the seminary challenges both religious and secular worldviews, offering a powerful reminder of the real dangers of spiritual pride and the pursuit of esoteric knowledge outside the bounds of religious authority. The discovery of these letters and documents raises troubling questions about other suppressed incidents, other tragedies of supernatural nature that may have been hidden away in attics, archives, and family histories. What secrets lie buried waiting to be uncovered? And what lessons could we learn from events that have been deliberately erased from history? The story of Whitmore Seminary serves as a warning, particularly in an age where alternative spiritualities and claims of special revelation are gaining traction. It cautions against abandoning the safeguards of traditional religious authority and community accountability. Just as the seminary's students sought shortcuts to spiritual power, so too do modern seekers risk spiritual destruction when they venture too far beyond the safety of established teaching. The fate of those 15 young men at Whitmore Seminary serves as a stark reminder. Knowledge, when pursued without humility and in isolation from the truth of community, can lead to destruction rather than enlightenment. The 15 young men who perished at Whitmore Seminary were not driven by malice or evil intentions. Rather, they were driven by ambition and curiosity, traits commonly celebrated in American culture. But their tragic fate serves as a poignant reminder that even the most virtuous qualities can become dangerous when they lead us away from humility and wisdom. Their pursuit of spiritual greatness led them to seek shortcuts to power that ultimately consumed them, leaving deep scars on everyone who knew them. The Presbyterian Church's handling of the incident, while successful in protecting its reputation and preventing immediate panic, also highlights the costs of institutional secrecy. By suppressing the truth, the church authorities shielded themselves from scandal, but ensured that future generations would be unable to learn from the events at the seminary. The recent discovery of hidden documents suggests that such secrets may be more common than we realize, and that other significant moments in history may have been concealed, waiting to be uncovered by chance or providence. The story of Whitmore Seminary also serves as a powerful reminder of the spiritual dimensions of human life. Josiah Whitmore's occult practices created lasting spiritual conditions that affected innocent lives decades after his death. While David Crane's faithful response restored spiritual balance to the land, it is clear that our spiritual choices have consequences far beyond what we can physically see or measure. The events at the seminary challenge us to remember that the spiritual realm is just as real as the physical one, and our choices regarding faith, morality, and practice have profound, lasting effects. Whether one interprets the events through supernatural or psychological lenses, the story is an urgent reminder of the need for humility, community accountability, and careful discernment in all matters of faith. The most terrifying evils, as shown in this tragedy, often arise from the purest intentions. The road to ruin can indeed be paved with the sincerest desires to serve God. The lessons of Whitmore Seminary are not just about the dangers of supernatural forces. They are about the dangers of spiritual pride and the importance of maintaining humility in our relationship with the divine. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything has been revealed, or do you think there are still secrets buried in the ruins of the Pennsylvania Seminary? Leave a comment below and let us know what you think really happened during that fateful winter of 1823. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries as much as you do. Until next time, remember, some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some knowledge is too dangerous to seek. See you in the next video. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel to watch the next interesting videos.